Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us here at Rocky Mountain PBS and KRMA for our latest monthly community circle, where we bring together experts in the community to have conversations about issues that seem to be affecting people the most. So far, we've focused on homeowners associations, addiction and recovery, and the housing crisis, both nationally and locally. Today, we're going to talk about something that's been getting a lot of attention with the recent passing of Proposition 122 in Colorado, which legalized certain psychedelic plants and fungi for people over the age of 21. Today, our conversation is going to focus on microdosing magic mushrooms for mental health, support, and spiritual growth. My name is Dana Knowles, and I'm a multimedia journalist here at Rocky Mountain PBS. First, I'm going to introduce our panelists that we have with us today. We have Dr. Jennifer Tippett, a licensed clinical psychologist who's a faculty member with the University of Denver's Graduate School of Professional Psychology. She's also director of the Substance Use Disorder Specialty Program. Her areas of expertise also include, but are not limited to, helping people heal trauma through psychedelic integration therapy. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that actually means in a few minutes. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Tippett.
Dana, can I just tell you, this is a little bit of an old bio I see that came from my website. I actually work as the Associate Director for Psychotherapeutic Development for Atai Life Sciences. So we're a mental health innovation company, and I'm adjunct at DU now.
Got it. Thank you for the update.
Totally.
Next, we have Sovereign Ashimare, a community leader here in Denver who wants to help educate people about the possible benefits of microdosing mushrooms for spiritual health. Sovereign is the ecosystem director for an organization called SPORE, which stands for the Society for Psychedelic Outreach, Reform, and Education. Ashimare also consults with companies in the plant medicine industry. Thank you for joining us today. We also have Tracy T. Rocky Mountain PBS did a story with Tracy recently that focused on a group she started called Moms on Mushrooms. After her experiencing the stress and isolation of being a mother in the middle of a pandemic, Tracy felt like microdosing mushrooms helped alleviate and process some of her trauma and anxiety. Before we get to our conversation and some of the questions that have already come in from the community, let's take a look at the story that Rocky Mountain PBS did with Tracy T a few months ago. We'll give it just a few seconds. Here we go.
Is microdosing just a word to say I'm doing drugs? I love that question. First of all, I don't consider psychedelics to be drugs. Drugs are, and a lot of people say all things are drugs. Sugar's a drug, coffee's a drug, alcohol's a drug. So drug in the negative connotation, I think is a changing definition. So no, microdosing is an intentional practice, I think, that should be used for healing, and that is the intent.
What I like to say is it kind of makes you 10% of something, 10% happier, 10% more patient, 10% more creative, 10% more open.
The thing about microdosing that's so interesting and hard, I think, for Western culture to wrap our brains around is that it's not medicine you get from Walgreens in a little bottle. There's no real right or wrong way to do it, except that, in my opinion, just swallowing down a capsule and thinking it's going to change your life is absolutely the wrong way. It does require work.
For me, the way that microdosing is different is that it still allows me to be fully present in the things that I'm experiencing. So I still have really high highs and I still have really low lows. The difference, though, is that I feel that I am able to handle them and navigate them a little bit differently and more effectively in ways that are healthy.
Microdosing is taking around 1/10 of a large dose, and a large dose is what people traditionally use, especially in original cultures and ancient, for a journey, which is where you do kind of go into the multiverse and talk to God and see things, and that's very powerful too. And a microdose takes that and distills it down to a tiny, tiny sub-perceptual amount of psilocybin so that you can fully function day to day, you can drive, you can be with your children, you can go to work, all the things. What you're noticing is that your negative patterns are starting to change. With microdosing, number one thing that people need to know is that it doesn't really make you feel anything. Again, you're not hallucinating. It's not the 60s trip that everyone is afraid of. You're not going to jump off a building, and you're not frying your brain like an egg.
And even as a musician, it helps with creativity and leveling you up. It helps, really take sometimes like a spin of, maybe a trajectory of how I'm feeling. Maybe it's negative, depressive, or just, antisocial. And then, I'll microdose and I'm like, and then I'll go on a hike and I'll feel way more connected with nature.
And it also allowed me to be more present with my children because I'm able to be more patient. It allows me to be more creative and an open communicator in my job. And it frankly has been something that's allowed me to show up in my relationships in a more authentic way because I'm not so anxious all the time. And so microdosing has really fundamentally changed how I move in the world and navigate relationships from my children all the way to my professional colleagues.
I felt a calm and a space between my words that I hadn't felt before. And slowly over time, because psilocybin helps rework your neural pathways, I started to just change a lot of bad habits, a lot of repeating habits, and just kind of came into myself.
Interestingly enough, most people that I talk to about microdosing, they ask a whole lot of questions, they have a lot of curiosities, and 9 times out of 10, they're calling me up saying, how do I get it?
Microdosing is what brings you, in the same way that you take an antidepressant, that's what microdosing is. It's not doing drugs because you're not feeling, your perception isn't changing. You're not feeling a difference in how you show up in the world, like, again, like tripping. So no, I don't think it's doing drugs at all. I think it's healing.
My first question is actually for Dr. Tippett after listening to this again. Can you kind of tell us from a neurological perspective, when someone is microdosing, what's happening to the brain? What's happening to the neuroreceptors? What's it doing to the neuroreceptors in the brain?
Well, I always feel like I'm the Debbie Downer that comes to every psychedelic party. And I'm always like waving my hands and like, we don't have research for that. I'm even doing it at Burning Man and people are like, really, we're in the desert, just calm down. There is no evidence actually that supports microdosing. And I couldn't tell you, so I can't tell you the answer to that because we don't know that. There's been some attempts to look at microdosing and the subjective experiences. There was a recent article published, I think it was Journal of Nature, that looked at like 30 some people. Didn't see a big effect except for those who correctly guessed that they were dosed. So it looks like it's mostly placebo from what our clinical trials can say. That said, I mean, it's a serotonin agonist. It binds somewhere. I'm sure it does something, but this is not like settled science. I can't tell you what it does in the brain.
What did the Johns Hopkins studies say?
So they were looking at macro doses primarily. There's just not enough. I mean, people are looking at microdosing. We like the idea of it. But so far the research hasn't, some that's been done hasn't borne anything out. So Johns Hopkins, are you talking more about like their overall general research with psilocybin? Yeah, so I can talk about that. Psilocybin in larger doses, we know, lights up the brain in a way that it doesn't get lit up without psychedelics. When I say light up, that really means if you put someone in a functional MRI, you look at their blood flow in their brain. It gets super bright when it's connected and active. And usually we only have like small parts of it working, but on like psilocybin, LSD, you get like the whole thing lit up. And so it can talk to itself in really different ways. There's a lot to do about the default mode network and this idea that it changes the neural pathways in your brain. We think it provides some extended level of neuroplasticity. I do think that I caution people about saying things like it changes your brain or it changes neural pathways. We don't have evidence for that. We do know that it seems to allow for more flexibility and greater connectivity that wasn't present before.
Okay. Having said all that, though, I do think it's important for people to kind of share their own personal kind of lived experiences
Absolutely.
With these. And so leading into that, Tracy, what made you want to look into microdosing mushrooms as opposed to just getting on an antidepressant?
I was on an antidepressant.
Okay.
So I have experience with both. I had a good experience. I was on Wellbutrin. It helped me transition through a full hysterectomy, and then go into surgical menopause if we want a little too much information about my life. But I relied on an antidepressant to really help me through a very, very big time in my life, physiologically and psychologically. So I know that experience pretty well. For me, it didn't seem like a sustainable solution, and I didn't find any intrinsic change in my personal behavior or patterns while taking Wellbutrin. What I was given was the gift of not experiencing the highs and lows of moods changing as my body shifted from having no hormones to support me. So microdosing, and this is coming from someone who never did drugs, never did ecstasy with my friends in college. I've never tried cocaine. I'm pretty square in that department. I drink, take some cannabis to sleep every now and then. Microdosing really felt like a great alternative to understanding the medicinal and the spiritual healing aspects of psilocybin in smaller doses, so that especially as a mother and a working mother, I was able to function day to day. And Dr. Tippett is right. The anecdotal evidence that I read and the people that I spoke to who had good experiences with it felt like enough proof points for me to try it.
Mm-hmm. And what were the direct benefits that you noticed?
Yeah. Almost immediately I felt, and this is what a lot of moms who I work with say as well, I felt this softening around my edges. I felt less reactive, which for anyone who knows me is not one of my greater qualities. And I feel like I was able to look at the words, like I said in that piece, kind of look at the words that were forming in my brain, zoom out, rearrange them and say, oh girl, don't say that. Nope. And then put them out of my mouth and take a pause. And in terms of being a mother, in terms of being a wife and a business owner, I felt like I wasn't as initially triggered by things that would normally kind of set me on edge. I was able to take a beat and kind of process in real time. And it deepened my spiritual practice immensely. And I will also say that a lot of that was supported by large dose journeys that had a very transformational effect on me as well.
Okay. So Sovereign, I'd love to talk to you a little bit more in depth about sort of the spiritual journey part of this, and really honing in on the point of the spiritual journey kind of comes after you figured out how to take care of your mental health. Can you, because you and I talked a little bit about that with the story that we did. Can you talk about that? Like you were able to find some mental health support with microdosing that eventually turned into like this spiritual journey. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So also like Tracy too, I'm more of a square, I would say square-ish when it came to like experimenting and doing different like drugs and things. And with microdosing, it gave me this opportunity to connect deeper with myself. And one of the ways that it did that, so like I went through a program, for those who are familiar with Naropa. And there's like a mindfulness component to our education. And so I eventually, one of the things that we were asked to do, and this is something that we all can do, is like sit in nature, or sit by a tree, or like sit in front of your plant, and and just like begin to have a relationship with that space. And so what happened for me was when I began my microdosing journey, there was a deeper connection to the plants that I was around. And that was really interesting to me because I was just like, what's this? Explain. And like, just like really just the more I would sit and connect with myself, the more I feel like I would connect with the plants. And just like that, those messages of at least for me, the messages of like the solutions to the world's problems can be found in nature. Like the answer to solidarity can be found in a tree. The elements of a tree have the elements of what is needed for solidarity. And so it kept giving me the space to dive deeper into what I believed, what I was communing with. And it's been incredible for me, be it placebo or not. Like, I think ultimately we want to be good people. And so like, if there is a bridge or a pathway for you to become better, taking care of yourself, seeing yourself as sacred, seeing yourself as a temple, taking time to like, really find out what your body wants and needs. That's been an amazing transformative experience for me, where I've been more connected to my body, and I'm like, oh, my body wants water, or like, oh, my body doesn't like that. Like, I'm like talking and having these relationships to myself, my body, and nature. And to me, that's deeply spiritual, and something that we all could benefit from.
You also talk a little bit about, or a lot about, how we need to include Indigenous communities kind of in this conversation. And why is that? And what does that look like to you?
Yeah. Like, first and foremost, I'll say it all the time, like, please, like, Indigenous wisdom, it's been here, and just the people that I'm in community with have been so gracious and open and, wanting to share wisdom. And so, for me, that looks like, first and foremost, naming that Indigenous wisdom is here and needing to have a relationship with it, and then finding those folks in your community. And sometimes that might be hard, right? Like, we all don't know like who those folks are, but like, there are organizations like Women of the Mountain. There's like, there is Google. She will tell you everything. She tells every single secret that has ever secreted. So like, you can find it, you can find relationship, or you can find groups, you can find events, and just be curious, be respectful, and be humble. And, like, I think that has been the lesson that I'm learning, and has been like incredible to just like witness that, and just understand too that like, so much that has happened in the last 2 years has like deeply impacted that community. And, like the asks around like needing to slow down, and the ask for being like acknowledged, named, and respected is something that I personally take to heart. And so as a community educator, as a community builder, like, relationship is key. Like, this doesn't stand without relationship. Like my analogy around the tree, right? Trees can't exist without the relationship with the sun, the relationship to earth, and relationship to water. Like, we have to be able to form these relationships, and who better to do that with than Indigenous folks who have been here before us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I have a question for Dr. Tippett. What is psychedelic integration therapy? What does that mean?
It means everything and nothing. It is the way in which we're able to legally work with folks if they have undergone a psychedelic experience. So often, to Sovereign's point, back in the eons of when people were actually using these plants the way they were meant to be used, you came back to a society that understood what you had gone through and had multiple systems to support you through kind of reliving or coming back. I like to tell people, like, your boss doesn't care about your newfound belonging. All right. Like, you still got to go to work. You still got to sit in traffic. You still got to manage kids. And so how are you going to take this really powerful experience, get what you need from it, and then integrate that into your life moving forward? You could ask probably 100 psychedelic integration therapists, and they will give you 100 different answers. None of this is settled science. So for us, it really is the sort of code word for, I'm not going to kick you out of my office if you come in and say you're using mushrooms, and I can help you process it and understand it in a different way than maybe a more traditional psychologist would.
What is the upside of that, of being able to give therapy to someone who's had like this super profound experience that takes them out of the normal talk therapy experience? What's the upside of that? What's the benefit?
Primarily, being able to really understand what happened. For some people, the trip is lovely and they experience, connectedness with nature and themselves, and it's this really beautiful thing. And for some people, it's not. And I've had plenty of trips myself where I was like, oh, I just got my butt kicked. And so being able to sit with somebody and process through that, really, really important. Also, because we don't have these systems and layers in a community that can hold that space for folks after they've gone into the multiverse. I loved that phrasing. You need someone who can sit with you and be with you in it. And from a scientific perspective, we do think that there is that increased openness 24 to 48 hours post a journey. And maybe we can get some really important perspective shifts and mine some things out of there that you then take into your life that changes how you show up. So we kind of want to capitalize on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy, what kinds of research and who did you start reaching out to when you kind of decided you wanted to, put magic mushrooms in your toolbox, so to speak, to help with your mental health? Like, how did you even get started? And if, I do want to say that all of the things that we're talking about and the questions that we're asking, none of this is considered medical advice. And I might say that again before the end, just so that everybody knows. But like, if somebody is interested in you, Tracy, as sort of a layperson, not necessarily, and I don't know if you did go through a therapist or not, but what advice would you give someone if they are like, maybe this could be helpful for me? Where would you suggest they begin?
Well, not to put a plug, but that's why I created Moms on Mushrooms, for that exact reason, for mothers specifically, because there's so much out there. And the last thing you want to do when you're interested in psychedelic, psilocybin, microdosing is follow #psilocybin on Instagram. Like, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. And so I think vetting the great information that already exists from experts in the field that have been doing this hard work for a long time. This is where YouTube becomes a really great tool. You've got Paul Stamets, you've got Robert Carhart Harris, you've got MAPS, you've got all of these institutions that have been putting work together for a long time. And then that's kind of how I started, is just this self-education. And one of the interesting things I think about this medicine specifically is that there isn't one program where you can get certified to administer psychedelics. First of all, to Sovereign's point, and one of my biggest teachers is my mentor, who's been working with this medicine as a medicine woman underground for decades. And there's a lot of wisdom there.
How'd you find her?
Well, I gotta tell you, that's the magic of psychedelics. It's so funny. I prayed for her, and to be perfectly honest, we were actually in a terrible car accident. My family was hit by a drunk driver outside Aspen, and she ended up being the person who treated my family as a therapist, treated my daughter, and then it turned out she also does this work. And this beautiful circle that happens when you kind of call in, and I would say that medicine held me during that horrible time. It was a really great example and a real big proof point for me of how I was able to alchemize this terrible tragedy that happened to my family, especially as a mother, that I was able to process it and release it out of my body instead of kind of reliving it over and over for a long time. I think this medicine, I think the microdose practice that I was already in really helped me. So yeah, I mean, there's books, you've got Fadiman, again, you've got Stamets. And I think there's a lot of power in self-education, and then using your discernment, obviously, to find the people who are speaking from not only a scientific perspective, but from the heart, not ego, not trying to make a quick buck. All those things exist in this space. Those are issues that we all have to figure out together. But I've got a stack of books right next to me about psychedelics that have been written many, many years ago and decades ago, and they're so valuable and helpful.
Sovereign, I see you kind of nodding along a little bit. What is there anything that you want to add to what she said? And I know one of the things she mentioned was I know one of the things Tracy mentioned in the story that we did is it isn't necessarily a one size fits all, and you're not going to take this thing and it's going to solve all your problems. No. Right? So that's not what we want to look for, right? Do you want to talk to that a little bit, Sovereign?
Yeah, like, I hear it's interesting. Some of the folks in this ecosystem that we're in, that is psychedelics, you have like, no shade to anyone, but like the bypassers, the ones who just are like looking to feel good, but not necessarily looking at the in between to actually get to the other side of that. And so, yeah, just wanting to speak to like, it's not for everyone, and it's not going to like fix your life. It's not Yamla. It's not going to do that for you. But what it does, it gives you an opportunity to look at things a little differently, and with support, with like community, with therapists, it'll help you get to where you want to go, but it's not a fast track. But it does, at least for me, it definitely indicated like transformation is possible. Like if you have a psychedelic experience, like you have firsthand information of how transformation is possible, because it changes your state of consciousness, right? So like, and so for me, the thing that I'm very curious and interested in is like utilizing, like right now we're in this space where like psychedelics is being used as a catalyst for capitalism. But what does it look like to use psychedelics as a catalyst for transformation, for like social and racial healing, for like the generations of trauma that we all as humans being on this planet and enduring this system are put through? Like how can psychedelics help us like deal with that, and what ecosystems can be created to help us move through that? And yeah.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Could I speak to that really quick? Because I agree with Sovereign 1000%. It became very apparent to me that this medicine shouldn't be taken in a vacuum, and that this is not a magic pill. And a lot of what I have learned by working with this medicine is unlearning the Western medical mindset of like swallowing down a pill, sitting back, and 3 days later saying, well, why hasn't my life changed?
We do that with tons of stuff in the West, right? Like this one thing
is it working?
Everything.
Is it working for anyone? I don't think it is. So again, Moms on Mushrooms I am trying to experiment with that exact idea, Sovereign, is that we come together in community, that there is no guru in the center of it, but that, come together with a shared experience, in my case, mothers, and a second shared experience, in that case, microdosing, and then learn together how this medicine can work through you, heal together, share your traumas. One of the most powerful things anyone said in any of my courses was a mom of 4 kids, sitting in a group of 10 women. And she looked around on Zoom and said, we all are sharing different stories, and they're all exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And coming to get to that understanding that we are the same but different experiences, and using that mycelial web to connect us together, is what I think the most powerful. That is what the elders want. This is what our original peoples want for this medicine. And that's if there is an experiment inside capitalism, I believe it has to be based in community.
Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts, Dr. Tippett? I kind of feel we recently did a story, two colleagues of mine did a story on ketamine therapy. And a lot of these experiences sound similar, where you take something like this, you take this in a very small amount, and it seems like it gives you the ability to pause, step back, create some space between you and the feeling. And that space is where you kind of process it. And then, with the ketamine experience, you do, you reach out to the therapist and you do meditation and you kind of journal. And it sounds similar to these microdosing experiences as well. Can you talk to that a little bit, Dr. Tippett, in terms of how you may have worked with people through similar experiences?
Oh gosh, you've hit two of my biggest soapboxes that are just not fun for this purposes. Yeah. So you're asking more about like the commonalities there. I mean, that's really how we used to describe SSRIs. I used to tell people it just gives you time to pause without reacting. And to Tracy's point, what it really was like you get to feel nothing and then decide what you're going to do. I would say that if I was going to couch this psychedelics, and I'm so sorry, I'm not going to throw microdosing in there because I stick to where the science goes. Psychedelics in general help you change your relationship with the feeling rather than have space from the feeling. So it's actually an internal shift in viewpoint and perspective and an experience of intensity and ability to manage. So I think that that's where that shift happens. And
how does that work with trauma? How does that work with trauma?
Yeah, I love that. So often when we get people who have severe trauma, whether it be personal trauma, childhood trauma, developmental trauma, CPTSD, racial trauma, community trauma, what we see is this middle part of your brain, the amygdala, the fear center, is just super active. So it's constantly scanning and it's like everything is bad. And what we think happens, this also happens with mindfulness and meditation. Psychedelics seem to help kind of shift that balance from that middle part, everything's bad, everything's awful, into this front part that's like, I think we're fine. I think it's okay. And when that voice can get louder, we can better correctly interpret the stimuli that's coming into our environment. So our nervous system creates our reality. And if our nervous system, which is what happens in trauma, is constantly heightened or super hypoaroused and frozen and numb, we don't correctly interpret what's happening. And so there is this idea that within that shift in the brain, we can start to change some patterns because not everything's awful and scary.
Interesting. Sovereign, what's the downside? Is there a downside? Would you discourage anyone in particular from going on this journey or looking into microdosing?
I mean, I definitely want to say that, like, it's not for everyone. And like, if you're curious, like, lean into that. But don't go from like, like we're mentioning microdosing, like don't just go and jump into like a macrodose situation. Definitely take your time to build a relationship with your intention of why you want to use it. Build a relationship with, like if you have a therapist, talk to your therapist. Like take it slow. And then I know, like, or at least I think I know. Dr. Tippett, like, tell me if I'm wrong on here, but like, certain folks who have mental health issues, like it's something like that could, intercept some things and make some things worse. So like just being mindful of where you are, where your mind is at, and again, like really asking, like, what's your intention in doing it? Are you doing it just to like see what it's all about? Or like for myself, my intention right now is like, I need to break through some of the barriers that keep me from moving forward. Keep giving me a relationship to this tension so that I may move forward. Like I'm really intentional about why I'm doing it. And so just like, yeah, getting deep with your intentions, just making sure that it's just, you're doing it with intention and not just having a good time. And some people do that, and, you know, to each their own. But like, if you're having questions around it and you're like, I don't know, like, that's definitely not a way to be entering a relationship with anything. So just being mindful of how you're entering that space and that newfound relationship that you're about to form. Just be as mindful as possible.
What was the biggest benefit for you, Sovereign, in terms of how it helped your mental health?
Getting space between me and that activated, like Dr. Tippett was saying, amygdala was life-changing. I didn't even realize how much my fight or flight was actually running the show until I started this journey with microdosing and being able to have space to like make different choices, and then getting a therapist to help me through some of the stuff that I was discovering, right? Like, I think, like what Tracy was saying, this is a community healing type of medicine, and asking for help and talking with others, you know, like that was also something that I used to not do. I was very much someone who suffered alone because I was like, nobody understands, and like nobody, you know, and like, or maybe my stuff is like gonna burden them. And just the more and more I've developed this relationship, I'm just like, oh, like I have to say I have to say it. I have to release it. I can't hold on to all my stuff like I used to. And so I think the biggest thing is like, it's given me power over myself to be able to voice when things are happening and to bring it into community and have myself be recalibrated through my community. That has been such a gift.
Yeah, I got my frontal lobe didn't kick in and I got impulsive, but I just loved what you were saying. And I think we are so often damaged in relationship, and it's also in relationship that we heal, right? So when we find community, when we find belonging, all of these things that psychedelics tend to pull, we find a lot of healing.
Wow. Is this something that a person takes every day? What do you think, Tracy? Is this something that you administer every day, or is it as needed, or I know that you've talked about how you're very mindful, but what is your approach in terms of using it?
Yeah. First, I want to just say in terms of one downside that I am concerned about is just emotional dependency. Understanding that ultimately, I say this often, is that I would love to be out of a job. You know, Dr. Julia Meir describes microdosing as, her vision is that it's a round of antibiotics for intrusive thoughts, so that this isn't something that we take in perpetuity. This isn't something that is a life sentence. This is something on an as needed basis. And ultimately, if the science eventually backs up what those of us who practice it know to be true, that our toxic bad habits are actually changed and we don't need the medicine. So I do worry about that emotional dependency. In terms of administering it, you're never supposed to take it every day. You don't need to. And so there's a lot of protocols out there, and I don't even love suggesting protocols. I think there's a couple dudes that just said what they think. And I think it's more intuitive. I think the most important thing is that you always take days off, that there's integration days. So again, so that you don't become emotionally dependent on the medicine. So I would say, as a rule, never take it more than 5 days a week at the most. And depending on
again, I want to say this is not medical advice.
Yeah, exactly. And I am not
I'm
a
asking
doctor.
about like your personal experience with this.
So I don't take it any more than 5 days a week, and rarely more than 3.
Okay. What about you, Sovereign?
Similar. I was on a regimen where I was doing some like coaching and like therapy, and it was it was 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 2 days off.
Okay. How long does it take for you to kind of figure all this out? Is it trial and error? Like, how do you figure out 2 days on, 2 days off for your nervous system?
Like I was lucky in, again, finding community. That's my, I am someone who I'm very lucky to, I'm a seeker of all things truth and community. So I like know how to just find what find the answers I need. And so I just happened to meet someone who, cultivates and does all the things. And and I got some really great advice on that. So it's a community. I think it's a relational and community medicine. And like, that's how you should enter it.
So not necessarily something you want to just go do by yourself. And again, to Tracy's point, just sit back and wait and see. You kind of need to work with people. What do you think, Dr. Tippett?
I think to Tracy's point, there's a lot of protocols out there and a lot of like fintech biohack bros on Joe Rogan who have a lot of ideas about what you should do.
We have ideas about all sorts of stuff.
All sorts of things. And to sound like a broken record, this isn't settled science. Some people find a lot of benefit. And if for whatever reason, whether it's placebo or not, if you feel better, do that thing, right? Like go do that as long as it's safe. And this is perfectly safe. Some people experience more anxiety. Some people experience heightened irritability. Some people feel nothing. All of that's very, very normal. If you feel nothing or irritability, stop doing it, by the way. But because there's no science behind this, there is no right way to do it. People will give you all sorts of opinions. You can decide what you think works for you. Certainly there's no need to take it every day, and there's nothing to suggest that you would have any more benefits from taking it every day as not. And it's not going to hurt you. Psilocybin's not going to hurt you.
Okay. We're getting some questions that have been coming in the last few minutes during our chat, and I wanted to kind of dig in with some of these. One says to find microdose versus a therapeutic dose. Where does one end and the other begin?
Generally speaking, we think a therapeutic dose is around 3 to 5 grams, although people are wild and will do more than that. It's not necessary. Don't do that. I shouldn't say don't do it. It's not necessary. We think people, when they talk about microdosing, they're usually talking about 0.3 to 0.5 grams. So it should be just under what you could detect subjectively. So you shouldn't feel high.
Okay. Another question is, and again, there isn't a lot of science, but the question is anyway, will antidepressants interfere with the benefits of micro and macro dosing?
SSRIs do dampen the subjective effect of psilocybin. So if you are on an antidepressant, you may not experience the same level of intensity that someone who is not.
Okay. And would that be the same, like if you're on an antidepressant and you're macro dosing?
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is a good one. So are these positive effects more about psychedelics versus just magic mushrooms?
And they're the same. They're just, I think they're kind of one and the same. There's a lot of terminology out there. And I think one of the interesting things in this moment is actually learning about psychedelics and what that means. Magic mushrooms is different from LSD, which is different from ibogaine, which is different from peyote. But magic mushrooms are a psychedelic.
Yeah, they're just mushrooms that contain psilocybin, or psilocybin, which converts. So yes, they are psychedelics.
Okay. Another question that came in is for Sovereign and Tracy. What type of physical side effects, positive or negative, have you had from mushrooms, if at all?
I mean, a negative one, sometimes like depending, like stomach might hurt. And that could be because of a whole bunch of things, like not drinking enough water, not having enough food. That's one. And then again, like the best side effect, was that the question?
Physical side effects, negative or positive.
Yeah, physical side effects for me. yeah, I feel like mushrooms and I get along really well. So yeah, if anything, I'm just more aware of my body.
Mhm. When you take it, how long does it take for you to feel what you're feeling, or what you're, what you expect to feel?
Well, that's the thing. Like, it's funny because sometimes it's like, because it's so light, it's like a little kiss. That's how I think of it. It's just like a little, like, so like sometimes I'll just go throughout my day and just not notice. But when I'm a very cerebral person, but I do notice how I talk to myself does change. And then this might be a story. I'll see if I can condense it. Once upon a time, I did a macrodose, and something that happened to me when I did that was completely immersed in nature, meaning that like I was watching like dirt and ants and the insects in the ground, like moving all the way up to trees, breathing and doing their thing. And so sometimes on a microdose, sometimes like, again, like I'm looking at my plant, it's created a relationship with me where I'm always aware of plants and other animals. There's just like a deeper connection there since I've been on this journey with microdosing, which I think is incredible, because I think a lot more of us could stand to deepen our relationship to the earth that is beneath our feet.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, what about you? Physical side effects, good and bad?
Yeah. Often people can feel, well, first of all, I think there's merit to say that playing around with the right dose is important. 50 milligrams for some people might feel the same as 200 for another. Again, I'm not a doctor, but there is wiggle room there. But I've noticed that if I drink caffeine and take my microdose kind of in the same space, I can feel a little bit more buzzy. Almost sometimes there, like Dr. Tippett said, there can be a little bit of heightened anxiousness. And there's a question mark as to why, but I've certainly found a correlation with caffeine. And it's actually helped me. I don't really drink coffee that much anymore. So to that point, other physical effects are just a reduction in cravings in general. I know I drink significantly less than I ever have. And when I do drink, I have alcohol. It's a very mindful reason. Yes. And I noticed that my body, like Sovereign was saying, I always suggest that, taking psilocybin allows your brain to finally listen to what your body has probably been saying to you for a very long time. And so all of a sudden, that second glass of wine, your body's like, I really don't like this inside me. And you're finally hearing what it's saying, and you're happy to oblige. You don't need it anymore, or I don't need it anymore like I did. So I'm like, we're good. One glass of wine was good. So I would say that's a positive one. For me, yeah, the buzziness, and sometimes I think headaches can be common. And again, but so much of that goes down to diet, hydration. What else are you taking? What other supplements? There's so many factors.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned drinking less. I have spoken with other people who microdose, and they have told me something similar, that they, without even realizing it, they drink less, or without realizing it, they stop altogether.
Yep.
And I know people who have stopped caffeine, like all these things that they've sort of developed a level of dependency sort of stops without them having to think about it. And then the mushrooms aren't something that they need to take forever either.
Yeah.
And it all sort of like goes away a little
And it's
bit.
not in this intense American,
Right.
like sober October, or I'm giving up everything for 60 days. It just falls away.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
Yeah. Dr. Tippett, this might be more of a question for you. Someone's asking about macrodosing for PTSD. Have they done studies with that, the macrodosing and PTSD?
Yeah, we like it for that.
We like it for that.
We like it for that. We really like MDMA for that.
Yeah.
But MDMA, by the way, is not a psychedelic that gets, I now call it psychedelic adjacent. There's like MDMA and ketamine, which is not psychedelics, but like psychedelic adjacent. Yeah, we're looking at that really heavily. And several organizations have put a lot of time and money and resources into determining whether that is a viable treatment option for folks who suffer from PTSD.
Interesting.
Good, by the way, looks positive.
Yeah. Let's see. Another question is, I live in a senior community where people have diagnoses like posterior cortical atrophy, Parkinson's, frontal dementia. They're frightened about what's coming for them and anxious. Would macrodosing provide changes for the brain for any of them? Is there a possible way to reduce anxiety about the future? And this is specifically, they're asking about macrodosing.
Yeah. Do you want, should I?
Yeah, go for it.
That's a lot of Johns Hopkins work. Brian Richards out of Johns Hopkins really looks at end of life and, terminal illness kind of considerations. Again, looks really positive. I think it's really important. I'm going to be the Debbie Downer one more time, to say that even though we've got decrim in Denver, that does not mean this is legal. So federal law supersedes all state laws. This is still illegal. You can't just go somewhere and be like, I'm going to do mushrooms. So that being said, are there studies looking at end of life terminal cancer? Yes. And do the results look very positive? Yes. Does that mean it's coming to a facility near you? Not likely. We're working on it.
Mm-hmm. We have just a few minutes left, and I kind of wanted to see if we could briefly give everybody a chance to just kind of, if there's anything else you want to add to this conversation. And I'll start with Sovereign. Is there something else that you want to add to this real quick? We have a few minutes.
Ultimately, everybody take naps, hug a tree. It'll change your life. And then also for people who are interested in some of the kind of like, we didn't touch upon it too much here, but just like life post Prop 122, working with SPORE. There's the My Coalition where we're trying to get community folks to figure out what's happening, what's going on, how are we going to move through as all of this stuff starts to change how people engage in psychedelics. It's opening up this huge gate for folks. And so the more education we have, the more infrastructure and culture that we build together as a community, the better. So just wanted to name that. And yeah, just check out the spore.org and, sign up for the My Coalition if you're interested. It's a great way to, kind of stay on top of like what's happening. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Tracy T, what about you? Any last thoughts? We could talk about this probably for the next 3 hours, right?
Yes,
without
absolutely.
any water breaks. But how would you like to wrap up your thoughts today?
Well, first, I just want to thank you, Dana, and PBS for opening up this conversation, for taking the lead as a media corporation and doing something right and having just a really open-ended conversation. So thank you. There's so much to learn in this space, and it's exciting and it can be scary. But I think what I would just say is that joy is your birthright. And we're coming to a moment where people are finally starting to realize that healing means that there is a whole wide world of opportunity and joy and happiness out there for them. And if psychedelics call to you, if this medicine calls to you, don't be scared, just be mindful, and intention is everything. Coming to any practice with intention and just working with something instead of against it is always gonna make it a more enjoyable experience. So leave it at that.
Dr. Tippett, what about you?
I love that. I would just say this is such a new space. We have indigenous wisdom, but we shut down looking at it, through many, many decades. And so we're still just getting familiar and figuring out what's what and who's who. And I think this is just going to continue to grow, and our knowledge about it is going to continue to grow. So I'm really excited to be sharing this space with so many amazing humans. And Dana, thank you so much for inviting us all here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you all taking the time out to be with us and to work with us and do rehearsals and all the emails and everything that we had to go back and forth with to arrange this. I know it takes time, and I appreciate you all very much. We are out of time. I want to thank everyone again who signed on to join us and to turn in questions. This is an important conversation to start having as we continue talking about mental health today. Log on to our website at rmpbs.org for more information and resources about microdosing and history and all sorts of information. And we appreciate you all, and we'll see you at the next community circle.